when a friend turns into a ruthless criminal. You've probably heard the saying, "With friends like these, who needs enemies?" This is often said about those who only pretend to be good friends, but are ready to betray, set up, deceive, and even commit a crime against you at any moment. Such vile actions often hide some selfish motive, but their consequences can be utterly unpredictable, and the bitter disappointment in a close person who betrayed your trust is usually the least of the evils. The case of Sarah Stern shocked even veteran police officers with the cynicism and cold-bloodedness with which her closest friend, whom she had known since childhood and trusted implicitly, dealt with the unfortunate young woman. It was this friend with whom the student shared her future plans and a significant secret that no one else knew. By doing so, Sarah essentially signed her own death warrant, as from that moment until the tragic end, the young man lived with plans on how to make her disappear forever, while remaining above suspicion. Surprisingly, this crime could have been prevented if those around had taken the perpetrator's words and actions more seriously. The criminal even laid out his plan on paper, presenting it as a script for a horror movie. But let's dissect this complex story from the beginning to understand what drove such a good friend. Who was Sarah Stern? Sarah Elizabeth Stern was born on March 24, 1997, in the small town of Neptune City in Monmouth County, New Jersey. She was the only and dearly beloved child in the simple family of Michael and Susan Stern. Due to health issues, Mrs. Stern couldn't have more children, so the parents poured all their love into their long-awaited daughter. Sarah grew up as an active, cheerful, and very sociable child. She performed on the school theater stage, was passionate about photography, drew well, and was involved in sports, competing for the local swimming team and playing softball. She dreamed of becoming an artist or designer and was preparing to apply to a local specialized college when a terrible tragedy struck her family. In the autumn of 2013, when 16-year-old Sarah had just graduated from high school and started college in the field of art she had dreamed of, her mother passed away. The woman had fought a long battle with cancer, and it seemed several times that the disease had receded, but the insidious illness returned with new force and ultimately won. This loss was a huge shock for the entire family, especially for the young girl who was always very close to her mother. For a while, Stern fell into depression, but she tried to support her father with whom she lived and who also had a hard time. They also lived with a dog named Buddy, whom the girl adored. Gradually, life began to improve. Sarah made plans for the future, and after graduating from college, she wanted to apply to a prestigious national university in New York. But before that, she dreamed of traveling the world, particularly planning to visit Canada and perhaps even live there for some time. The abandoned car. Michael Stern often had to travel out of state for work, sometimes for weeks at a stretch. But he never worried about leaving his daughter home alone because she was a grown, independent young woman and their town was considered quiet and safe. However, in December 2016, when he flew out for another business trip, trouble came knocking at his door. On the night of December 3rd, 2016, around 2:30 a.m., a call came into the police station from a concerned man reporting a car abandoned in the middle of the Belmar Bridge along Highway 35. The area was quite deserted, rarely traversed by anyone at night, making the solitary, empty vehicle immediately suspicious. The caller was a taxi driver, taking a shortcut home over the old bridge on the outskirts. He noticed the car parked by the side and stopped to see if anyone needed help. Finding the cabin empty and no one around, he called the police, suspecting the driver might have come here to end their life by jumping into the water below, a sadly not uncommon occurrence at this spot. Responding officers noted the keys left in the ignition. There were no signs of blood in the car, nor any signs of a struggle, leading to the initial theory that someone came to the bridge with the intention of voluntarily leaving this world by jumping into the river below. The next step was to find out who owned the abandoned old silver sedan. A database check revealed the car belonged to one Lily Stern, a senior American citizen who recently celebrated her 85th birthday. She lived in the same town, about 10 kilometers from where her car was found. Officers promptly visited Miss Stern's home to understand how and why the elderly woman's car ended up on the bridge at night. Lily was found at home, alive, well, and surprised by the police visit. She explained that due to poor eyesight, she hadn't driven for years. Instead, her 19-year-old granddaughter Sarah was the one who drove the car. Concerned, Lily immediately tried to call Sarah, but her phone was turned off. She then gave the officers her son's address, where he lived with Sarah, noting that only Sarah should be home since her father was away on a work trip and wouldn't be back until the next week. The mysteriously disappeared student. Sarah was not at home, and the back door to the house was found open, a worrying sign. An initial sweep by the police inside revealed nothing suspicious except for a dog whining locked in one of the bedrooms. There was no indication of any crime taking place. Belongings were in order, and there were no signs of struggle, bloodstains, or any evidence of an intruder's presence. By then, news of the situation had reached Michael Stern, and he was on his way home on the first available flight. The homeowner confirmed everything was in its place, and nothing was missing. Moreover, he stated that all of Sarah's personal belongings were also at home, including her passport, driver's license, and even her mobile phone, which she never parted with. The police shared their initial thoughts with Michael, suggesting his daughter might have gone to the bridge with the intention of jumping, and asked if he had noticed any signs of suicidal tendencies or self-harm attempts. Michael admitted that after his wife's passing, Sarah had gone through a period of depression, but with the support of family, friends, and her studies, she managed to recover. Furthermore, she had big plans for the future, dreaming of becoming a designer, wanting to travel and see the world. Nonetheless, on the night of December 3rd, the student vanished from her own home, and a few hours later, her car was found abandoned on the bridge. These were the established facts. Sarah was officially missing, and the investigation had to figure out who she was in contact with that day, what conversations she had, and who saw her last. Testimonies from the first witnesses. It soon came to light that on December 2nd, Sarah Stern had spent nearly the entire day with her best friend Liam Nakatazny, whom she had known since childhood. Liam turned out to be the last person who saw her, potentially shedding light on this mysterious case. Thus, law enforcement quickly decided to speak with him to gather details and try to reconstruct the events of that day. Upon arriving at the Nakatazny residence, police were met by Liam's mother, who informed them that her son was sleeping off a night shift. At the officer's request, she woke him up. Seemingly confused about the situation, Liam was surprised to learn about Sarah's disappearance. He confirmed that they had spent most of the previous day together and agreed to go to the police station to provide his statement. Liam shared that they had gone to college together in the morning, but decided to skip the last 2 lectures since it was Friday, and they wanted to relax. After class, they went back to her place, played video games, chatted, and shared their future plans. They left the house twice that day, once to grab food from a nearby fast food restaurant and another time to stop by a local supermarket. Around 7 in the evening, he left Sarah's house to head to his night shift at the 24-hour store and didn't see her after that. When asked if Sarah had been experiencing any psychological issues or other difficulties, Liam revealed quite a bit. He said that Sarah had been deeply depressed since her mother's passing, teetering between wanting to end it all or run away and start anew. He also mentioned that Sarah had had issues communicating with her father, struggling to find common ground. Liam didn't dismiss the possibility that Sarah might have taken her own life, but noted that shortly before disappearing, she had seriously considered moving to Canada and had even exchanged some money. His claim was confirmed by finding Canadian dollars in a bedside table drawer in Sarah's room, though the amount was so small it wouldn't have covered much. Another close friend and former classmate of Stern's, Preston Taylor, who had been her date to the high school prom and kept in touch after graduation, also gave a statement. He corroborated Liam's account, adding that Sarah was depressed and speculated that she either ran away to Canada or jumped off the bridge. By the end of the conversation, he was in tears, expressing how much Sarah meant to him, search for the body, questioning other witnesses. The theory of Sarah fleeing to Canada, or anywhere for that matter, was almost immediately dismissed since she couldn't have left the country without her passport. Law enforcement then focused on the grimmer theory and organized a massive search effort in the river. The search was complicated by the strong current in that area, which could quickly carry a body miles away from the bridge. Divers were deployed, special equipment was used, and police, along with hundreds of volunteers, scoured both banks of the river, looking for remains or any of Sarah's belongings. Among the volunteers actively participating in the search were also Liam and Preston. Unfortunately, despite all efforts, no trace of Sarah was found. Therefore, law enforcement decided to continue questioning people who knew her and were close to her. That's when a peculiar discrepancy emerged. According to friends and classmates, Sarah was not depressed. She was in great spirits, and none had heard about any problems with her father. On the contrary, she always spoke of him warmly and lovingly. However, after Sarah's disappearance, Liam and Preston behaved as if they had lost a close relative, garnering sympathy from many. But soon, people started to notice that their behavior was odd, as if they were performing for an audience. The two had become very close, but this development occurred about a month before the incident. Therefore, the police decided to take a closer look at the friends and re-interview them, the adopted brother of a wealthy heiress. When Liam was brought back to the station for further questioning, he appeared deeply distressed. The investigator inquired once more about his relationship with Sarah and Preston. Liam shared that the three of them grew up on the same street, attended the same school, and were closely knit, sharing their deepest secrets and dreams. Preston even took Sarah to the prom, but there were no romantic feelings between them. Liam mentioned that he and Sarah were not just friends. He considered her his sister. They even listed each other as siblings on their social media profiles. Sarah had no secrets from him, and she had told him that her mother had left her a significant amount of cash, most of which was kept in the safety deposit box. Allegedly, Sarah didn't trust her father, who also claimed a right to the funds, so she stored the money in the bank, but planned to retrieve it soon to run away to Canada. When this story was relayed to Michael Stern, he was quite surprised and offered his version of events. According to him, his wife began saving money for their daughter's future, for education, a wedding, or a home, from the moment Sarah was born. The cash was kept at home, stored in a shoebox, with many bills being old and some quite worn, though no one thought much of it at the time. After his wife passed away, the father handed the box of money to Sarah, advising her to deposit the old and worn bills in the bank. Sarah followed his advice, depositing some of the money into her checking account for everyday expenses and renting a safety deposit box for the rest. She decided to use it to pay for university after finishing college and to travel the world. Michael sternly denied having any claim to the money for his own purposes. What is the best friend hiding? The revelation that the missing student had a large sum of money led investigators to consider the possibility that someone might have targeted her for financial gain. The investigation then decided to check her safety deposit box and bank transactions. It turned out that a few days before disappearing, Sarah had withdrawn a substantial amount from an ATM and had also visited the bank to take out some cash from her box. Another surprise awaited the detectives. Bank surveillance footage revealed that Sarah hadn't gone to the bank alone, but was accompanied by Liam, who obviously knew about Sarah's banking activities. They decided to question Liam again, specifically why he hadn't mentioned this bank visit, which occurred on December 1st. His hesitation was noticeable, but he explained that Sarah trusted no one but him and had asked him to accompany her to the bank because she was afraid to carry a large amount of cash back home. His explanation seemed logical, and his demeanor was natural. Moreover, it was discovered that a house across from the Stern residence had a security camera that captured the street and part of the neighbor's yard. Footage from this camera confirmed that Liam stayed at Sarah's house until 7 in the evening, then left for work and did not return, while the silver sedan left the garage around 11 at night. A plot straight out of a horror movie. About a month after the girl's disappearance, another acquaintance of hers named Anthony, who had been out of town for several weeks and was unaware of the events, walked into the police station with a bizarre and chilling story. It turned out Anthony had been in the same class with Sarah, Liam, and Preston, and after graduating, he dived deep into studying filmmaking, maintaining communication only with Liam, who also had an interest in cinema. Anthony recounted that about a month and a half before Sarah vanished, Liam visited him, and one evening they brainstormed ideas for a horror flick aimed at teenagers. Liam quickly came up with a story about a girl who secretly tells a friend about a large sum of money she possesses. The friend, after gaining her trust and learning all the details, strangles her and dumps her body in a turbulent river. Anthony liked the plot, and they even wrote a couple of pages of the script that evening. However, Anthony soon moved on to another project, forgot about the story, and then left town for a real film shoot where he was working as a camera assistant. Upon his return, Liam unexpectedly called him, inquiring if the police had visited him or summoned him for questioning. Surprised by such questions and learning of Sarah's disappearance and the circumstances surrounding it, Anthony decided to go to the police himself. A horrifying confession. After hearing the new witness's testimony, the authorities suggested Anthony draw Liam into an open conversation and try to elicit a confession from him. Anthony agreed, and a plan was devised. He would invite Liam to collaborate on a project that required renting professional camera equipment, which they ostensibly couldn't afford. Knowing the suspect's aspirations of being in a movie, it was likely he wouldn't miss such an opportunity and might offer the money he took from Sarah. Liam took the bait almost immediately, but suggested they meet in person to discuss the details. A hidden camera was installed in Anthony's car, and he was instructed to carefully coax a confession out of his friend. When the two met, and Liam got into Anthony's car, he looked around cautiously, as if afraid there might be someone else inside. He then handed over an envelope containing $2,000 in old bills, asking if it was enough to rent the filming equipment. Anthony nodded affirmatively, and then inquired where Liam got so much old currency. Liam hesitated, then admitted the money was Sarah's, which he and Preston had taken from her house because the dead don't need it. He didn't go into further details, but his admission was enough for the police to arrest him and Taylor on suspicion of crime. The accomplice's tale. Preston quickly started cooperating with the authorities, striking a deal with the prosecution. He claimed he did not participate in the act itself, but helped his friend cover up the evidence and dispose of the body. According to Preston, Liam began devising plans to take Sarah's money as soon as he learned of its existence. It turned out that Sarah had kept her inheritance a secret even from her best friend for a long time. But when she seriously started planning her trip to Canada, Liam inquired how she intended to fund it, prompting Sarah to reveal the money left by her mother. Liam convinced her that such a sum was safer in a home safe than a bank vault and insisted she withdraw the cash. He even borrowed a significant amount from her right before the tragedy, the same money she had withdrawn from the ATM. When Sarah's father was out of town on a business trip, Liam decided it was time to put his plan into action. He roped in Preston by promising him $25,000. McCrime decided to handle the dirty work himself, requiring his friend only to help him erase any traces. He convinced Sarah to withdraw the money, failing to check how much she took out. They spent the next day together, with Liam waiting for the right moment. He locked Sarah's dog in another room to prevent it from defending its owner. Approaching her from behind, he began to strangle her. However, the crime proved more challenging than expected. Firstly, the athletic and strong Sarah resisted fiercely, leading to a struggle until she lost consciousness. Secondly, just when he thought she had passed, she would show signs of life. It took the perpetrator about half an hour to be sure Sarah Stern was no longer breathing. Afterward, Liam left her house, heading to work, leaving Preston to step in. He snuck into Sarah's house through the back door, out of the camera's view, dragged the body to the garage, and tidied up the room. A couple of hours later, Liam returned, took a small safe from Sarah's room, placed the body in the car, and drove off in such a way as to avoid being captured by the neighbor's camera. He headed to the bridge where Preston awaited in his own vehicle. Together, they disposed of the body in the river, wiped down the steering wheel, and drove away in Preston's car back to Liam's house to split the loot. They faced a huge disappointment as they found only $10,000 in the safe, not the $100,000 McAtasney had anticipated. However, they decided not to spend the old bills immediately to avoid suspicion. The accomplices buried the safe in a local park, spending only the money Sarah had withdrawn from her account. Trial and verdict. Despite Preston's confession, Liam McAtasney steadfastly denied any wrongdoing, attempting to shift the blame onto his friend. McAtasney's lawyer also insisted on his client's innocence, suggesting Taylor acted alone. Moreover, as the body was never found and the circumstances of the disappearance remained unclear, there was a lingering possibility that Sarah was still alive, having vanished without her documents, money, belongings, or phone. A search of Liam's house turned up nothing except a small key fitting the buried safe, identified by Preston. The trial lasted over 2 years, but despite the absence of a body and McAtasney's confessions, his guilt was established through the combination of evidence. The script described months before the incident, the key to the safe found in his home, his words captured in Anthony's car, and the old bills he handed over. Additionally, fingerprints of both Preston and Liam were found inside the safe, and a colleague testified that McAtasney was absent from work for a few hours that night, asking to be covered. Liam McAtasney was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His accomplice, who did not directly participate in the act, received an 18-year sentence for obstruction of justice and hindering the investigation. Preston Taylor is eligible for parole no sooner than 15 years into his sentence. The body of college student Sarah Stern remains undiscovered to this day. The case of Sheila LaBar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila LaBar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila LaBar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila LaBar? Sheila LaBar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LaBar, Van Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strazut filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them, but all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and constantly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill LaBar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Etha, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon LaBar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself LaBar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill LaBar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. They got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch LaBar constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth inherited by her. In 2004, LaBar met on one of the city streets a homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and LaBar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny Towdy. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of internet phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny Towdy, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy LaBar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at LaBar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which he asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find LaBar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made, a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since LaBar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. LaBar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. The city of Welcome in the Free State Province is the youngest and most dynamically developing city in South Africa. It was founded in 1947, following the discovery of the largest gold deposit in the area the previous year. Its name translates from Afrikaans, one of the country's official languages, as greeting. Despite its welcoming name and its industry-forming gold mining, it gained widespread attention due to a grievous crime that occurred there in 2011. When the criminals were identified, the prosecution was baffled. This notorious case became the 10th in the history of international criminal activity. During the investigation, it was discovered that the case involved followers of Satanism and occultism. Michael Van Eck was born on August 14, 1987, in the young and developing city for gold miners. He became the only brother to 4 sisters, Natasha, Michelle, Bianca, and Hendriana. The boy grew up in a large and close-knit family. His parents were caring and loving people. To provide a decent life for their children, the head of the family worked hard and organized his own business. The mother created a favorable atmosphere in the home for the growth and development of the younger generation. Michael was sociable and kind, showed diligence in school and sports. He even earned a black belt in karate, which he was very proud of. This gave him confidence and resilience. After finishing school, the young man trained as an electrician. This in-demand profession opened the doors to good earnings and promising work. The young man worked in his field at mine number 4 of the Beatrix mine in the small town of Unison. He did not stop there and continued his education to become an engineer. In 2011, the 23-year-old hero of our story registered on the dating site. In this way, he wanted to distract himself from a breakup and make new acquaintances. It seemed that luck smiled at him one day. Among the numerous photos and profiles, a lonely young man took a fancy to the profile of a sweet and smiling girl. During the ensuing correspondence, the guy learned that their interests coincided. She, like him, disliked noisy parties and drunk companies and wanted to find true love and build a strong family. Michael was pleasantly surprised that he could find a suitable candidate on the internet. Since the young man still lived with his parents, he shared his joys and concerns with his mother. On April 2nd, the son boasted to her that he was going on a date, and he prepared thoroughly for it. To please the girl, he withdrew his first paycheck of 1,000 rand from his card. The only thing that troubled the young man was the unusual place his friend chose for their first meeting. It was the city cemetery. Apparently not to worry his parents, he kept quiet about it. Around 9 p.m. that same day, Michael said goodbye to his family and left the house. He headed to the designated place in the silver Peugeot 207, a gift from his parents for his coming of age. As tradition demanded, the girl was a little late, but her appearance was impressive. The stranger from the internet arrived in a pristine white dress and smiled. The conversation was relaxed, after which she suggested continuing the evening further and invited the young man to a distant part of the cemetery. There, a meadow awaited them with a spread blanket. On it lay a basket of fruits and wine. After the young people had a glass each, the beautiful companion kissed a stunned Michael. Suddenly, the pleasant feeling of the kiss turned to pain and horror. The unsuspecting young man became part of a sinister plan, since the innocent appearance of his pen pal did not match her inner world. Chama van Heerden was born in 1991 during a crisis period for her parents. When her mother found out she was pregnant, the couple decided to delay their divorce and give their relationship another chance. However, their attempts to reconcile and improve their life together were unsuccessful. The family environment only worsened. Her mother openly disliked the little girl, seeing her as a tie to her husband. After the divorce, she took the children and moved away from her former husband. However, the failed marriage was not the main reason for her coldness. She continued to lack love and attention towards her children, even after the relationship ended. All 3 children felt lonely and misunderstood, but Chana suffered the most. She grew up withdrawn and sullen. From an early age, she exhibited psychological issues. She talked about death and drew incomprehensible pictures. Eventually, the little girl developed an imaginary friend named Azazel. Concerned about their daughter's behavior, her grandparents thought she was possessed. Thus, they decided to take her to church, where she underwent an exorcism ritual. According to a witness, her body convulsed during the prayers. In reality, Chana was scared of crowds and clearly frightened by the ordeal. The shock could have triggered an epileptic seizure. The traumatic event deeply impacted the young girl's memory, causing her to develop a fear of the dark. Additionally, her mother once told her that toys come to life at night, which led the frightened daughter to tape her doll's eyes shut and tie their bodies with shoelaces. As she grew older, her mental condition worsened. At age 10, she nearly harmed a house guest with a knife while visiting her father. Only after this incident did they seek psychiatric help for Chana. Following a specialist's evaluation, she was prescribed sedatives. The medication had a positive effect on her mood and well-being. She became calmer and more friendly. During a remission period, her father spent more time with his daughter. He often picked her up from school and took her hunting with him. By sharing his hobby, he aimed to give her the attention she lacked. The unstable teenager enjoyed her father's activity. She later confessed that she found pleasure in butchering carcasses and skinning animals. This led her to bring home dead animals, starting with rats and birds and eventually progressing to cats and dogs. She enjoyed cutting flesh and occasionally inflicted injuries on herself. During an investigation, her sister revealed that at age 12, Chana befriended an older man who introduced her to forbidden substances and took advantage of her condition. Her sisters did not inform their parents, but Chana ended the destructive relationship. This experience undoubtedly had a negative impact on her troubled psyche. At age 15, her mother moved to New Zealand, where she met another man and stayed with him. Over time, she never returned for her children. They remained with their father and stepmother, who tried their best to provide for the children, though they did not fully understand the severity of the youngest daughter's issues. Her behavior was largely attributed to adolescence. The situation worsened a year later, when Chama became involved with a 22-year-old young man interested in Satanism, occultism, and voodoo cults. The boyfriend became a real mentor to the impressionable young woman, but he was cruel in character, often suppressing and demeaning her. Nonetheless, a supportive family environment and psychotherapy yielded positive results. By her 17th birthday, Chama's life began to improve. She broke off dangerous connections, graduated from high school, and enrolled in college where she studied art and graphic design. After Chana lost interest in Satanism and stopped using forbidden substances, her emotional state improved. She excelled in her studies and secured a job in her field. At her new job, Chana found support not only from her colleagues, but also from management. It turned out she had a real talent for visual arts, which brought her respect and recognition in her professional field. At the same time, she started dating a man named Warren. To outsiders, her life appeared completely normal. Her family and close friends did not discuss her past, hoping that the difficult times were behind her. However, what was happening in her soul was hard to say. Perhaps her inner demons were merely lying dormant. Her father was the happiest for Chama. He hoped that she had finally matured and would soon marry. However, his expectations were not met. The obstacle emerged from an unexpected source. Warren had a friend named Roy who considered himself highly sensitive. Despite Chana's sweet and friendly demeanor, he sensed something repellent and malevolent in her. Yet Roy's words were not taken seriously, as her outward appearance did not match his perceptions. One day, he pulled her aside and asked, "Who is Norman?" Each time he saw her, this name popped into the clairvoyant's mind. The young man thought she might not be faithful to his friend, so he decided to ask her directly. In response, Chana unexpectedly spat in his face and demanded he stop bothering her with foolish questions. It later became known that Norman was the second name of Azazel, her imaginary childhood friend. Following the incident, the dynamics between the young people changed. At one of the parties, Chana's attention shifted to a 24-year-old named Martins. Although the young man was generally calm and sociable, there were unpleasant rumors about him. Martins van der Merwe. Martins van der Merwe was born into a well-off and respected family. Unlike Chana, he had excellent relationships with both parents. As a child, he was smart and well-mannered, performing well academically. However, it turned out that since the age of 6, he had been suffering from a mental illness. Around that time, he began experiencing hallucinations. His parents recounted that according to their son, a certain entity appeared to him, convincing the boy that he was endowed with incredible strength. Martins believed this and felt special. Gradually, his mental condition worsened and his behavior changed. Due to problems at school and home, at the age of 14, van der Merwe was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. There, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Unfortunately, conventional treatment did not help. Since the family was financially secure, his parents dedicated all their efforts to finding effective medications. Thanks to the efforts of both family and doctors, the necessary drugs were eventually found. With these, nearly all deviations were controlled, except for sporadic outbursts of aggression. Martins once witnessed a stray cat being mauled by dogs. It made a deep impression on him. Instead of feeling disgust or pity, he hid the animal's body and watched it. This led him to start torturing animals. He later dropped out of school and began helping his father in the carpentry shop. In the future, Martins dreamed of continuing the family tradition. While working, his condition improved. He no longer wanted to do bad things to animals and take their lives. For this reason, he stopped taking medication. Everyone was wary of his decision, but the young man insisted that the disease had receded and that he was in control. Unfortunately, this turned out to be an inevitable mistake: general insanity. His mental state gradually deteriorated. It was around this time that Martins met Chana. These unstable young people found each other and began dating. However, outwardly they looked happy, so their parents were happy with their relationship. Of course, neither of them admitted to the problems their children had faced in the past. In the end, their union led to horrifying consequences. At first, the couple was open to the outside world, socializing and attending parties. Acquaintances recalled that they sometimes noticed cuts on the hands of young people. They joked that they were engaged in intimate experiments. After that, they began to distance themselves from people. They became interested in Satanism, voodoo cults, and occult practices. They also became interested in infamous serial criminals. In February 2011, Martins posted a picture with Chana on one of his social media pages. The pair were hugging, and the caption under the photo read, "Killers," with an ambiguous emoji. At the time, no one took their post seriously. Eventually, the young man asked his girlfriend's father for a marriage license. Mr. Van Heerden was incredibly happy. No one could have imagined what terrible dreams the couple nurtured. Instead of dreaming of traveling and children, they wanted to end their lives. Gradually, their sick fantasies turned into a bloodthirsty plan. The crazy couple decided to torture the homeless to death, and they practiced on animals. However, their plan was never realized, as the criminals could not find a suitable victim. Their monstrous plan was waiting for the right moment. The encounter. It all began when Chana posted her profile on a dating site. Before long, a young man named Michael Van Eck responded. The attractive young man caught the interest of the nefarious couple, and Chana targeted him for their plans. From the very first messages, the young people started flirting. After a few days of communication, the girl suggested they meet. Michael had been looking forward to this, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon or directly from her. Unfortunately, the somewhat unusual location for their first date didn't raise any alarms for him. Apparently, he was so eager to meet the charming conversationalist from the internet in person that he agreed to the dubious proposal. Chana and Martins meticulously prepared to bring their wild dream to life. They thought through everything thoroughly: the attire, the means to end a life, and even the setting. Chana approached the date fully prepared. The trap. The long-awaited meeting went exactly as planned for both parties. The victim fell for the bait. An angelic appearance of the girl and a kiss lulled his alertness. This gesture was the agreed-upon signal for Martins. All this time, the man had been hiding behind the tombstones. He approached Michael from behind and struck him with a knife. Unexpectedly for everyone, the young man resisted. The attackers hadn't anticipated this. Noticing that their new acquaintance was putting up a desperate fight, Chana intervened. Altogether, they inflicted about 30 knife wounds on the unfortunate young man. Ultimately, completely weakened, Michael begged them to end his suffering. Pleased with their conquest, Martin slit his throat. After that, the unthinkable began. The perpetrators dragged the body onto the blanket and proceeded with their plan. The couple severed the young man's right and left legs at the knee and decapitated him. The severed parts were placed in bags. They then decided to hide the body at the site. However, they miscalculated one thing: they had no shovels. Thus, they had to dig the earth with their hands and knives. As a result, they could not make the grave deep enough. After burying the body halfway, the perpetrators left with their trophies. Along the way, they used the victim's vehicle. Martins initially took the wheel, but later handed control over to his companion. The surge of adrenaline prevented him from keeping his eyes on the road. Upon arriving home, they stored the bags with body parts in the refrigerator as if they were groceries. After Van der Merwe had somewhat recovered, he started Michael's car and drove it to a troubled neighborhood. The criminals hoped the car would be stolen, so he left it unlocked with the keys in the ignition. The victim. The next day, a cemetery worker noticed a fresh burial that wasn't there the day before. His dreadful suspicions were confirmed when he stumbled upon bloody traces and torn clothing in the bushes. He then called over his supervisor to examine the grave. What the unintended witnesses found would long remain etched in their memory. Beneath the soil lay a dismembered male body. The authorities were immediately notified of the grim discovery. At the same time, Michael's parents were beside themselves with worry. Since the previous evening, he hadn't responded to calls, even if it was presumed that he had stayed overnight at his internet girlfriend's place. He should have made contact by now. Instead, Michael's workplace called his parents. The concerned management wanted to understand why he was absent from a crucial site. At the same time, the police received a report about a Peugeot 207 found abandoned in a parking lot. Passers-by were alarmed by the bloodstains on the trunk. After running the vehicle through their database, the owner was identified. Detectives also tracked that before its discovery, the car had been at the cemetery for a long time. The local precinct was already aware of an unidentified body found on its grounds. All signs were suspicious. Armed with this information, law enforcement officials went to the residence of Michael Van Eck. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed their suspicions. His parents had been searching for the young man since the previous day. They asked Michael's mother to come to the cemetery, where forensic specialists and search dogs were already at work, desperately trying to locate missing body parts. At the scene, the woman recognized belongings found, and she also identified her son's body by distinctive burn marks he had sustained in childhood. During the autopsy, the medical examination confirmed that the young man had suffered numerous knife wounds. Signs of his struggle were evident. It was also determined that the body had been dismembered post-mortem. At least the perpetrators had the mercy not to do this while he was still alive. Meanwhile, experts noted that the dismemberment was performed with professional precision, indicating that the perpetrators had significant experience in this area. There was no doubt that multiple attackers were involved. The number of wounds, their nature, and the strength required to subdue the victim clearly demonstrated this. Ultimately, DNA testing confirmed the identity of 23-year-old Michael Van Eck. Time to gather stones. During the investigation, police confiscated the victim's cell phone and computer. It was established that the last person the young man had communicated with was Chama Van Heerden. According to their messages, she was the one who invited him to the ominous date at the cemetery. Subsequently, detectives contacted the potential suspect and invited her to give a statement. The young woman did not refuse and arrived with her boyfriend, Martins van der Merwe. The couple was interviewed separately. During the questioning, they confessed to being involved in the group ending of a life. Upon learning of the incident, the girl's father rushed to the station. He couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked his daughter if she really was involved in the accusations against her. Chana calmly confirmed and added that she would willingly do it again. She claimed she had dreamt of this ever since she started hunting with him. The cruel confession of the seemingly sweet girl shocked not only her father but everyone present. Her boyfriend Martins also behaved defiantly. As the case gained public attention, he did not hide his pleasure from the public scrutiny and posed for the cameras. It was clear that none of the accused felt remorse for their actions. It turned out that after the crime, if caught, the mad couple planned to end their lives. But the young man changed his mind, and his partner followed suit. They wanted to live the lair of monsters. During the search of the young couple's apartment, police felt uneasy, to say the least. The environment was horrifying. The walls were adorned with portraits of Chana, depicting her in various guises. In some, she was depicted without eyes, in others without a mouth or ears. All images of the girl were distorted. Additionally, the rooms contained ritual items, animal scalps, knives, and various objects of unclear purpose. Also found were belongings of the deceased young man, glasses, and a wallet. As Martins later confessed, they took Michael's money to buy necessary items for their next crime. However, the most horrifying discovery awaited in the refrigerator. From it, police retrieved Michael's head with the mouth sewn shut. It was assumed that the couple planned to use the young man's head as a ritual bowl later on. Eyes and ears of the victim were stored in separate containers. The victim's hand and leg were found buried near the murderer's home, alongside the bodies of various animals. The girl's diary contained horrific thoughts and their impending realization. From everything discovered during the inspection, it was clear that the couple planned not just one more crime. The process of ending lives and subsequent mutilation of bodies provided them with unimaginable pleasure. Martins and Chana underwent multiple evaluations for mental competence. Fortunately, the commission confirmed that the young individuals were aware of their actions and desired the inevitable consequences. Otherwise, they might have avoided punishment and received only mandatory treatment. Punishment. In November 2011, the trial concerning Chana took place, treating her as a serial offender. Despite this being a singular incident, she did not hide her desire to repeat her actions. She told the court that she understands she should feel shame or remorse, but for some reason, she does not. She can only grasp the gravity of her actions through societal standards and the reactions of others. Psychiatrists declared that the defendant suffers from psychopathic and antisocial disorders, apparently more dangerous than her boyfriend, but adept at concealing it. Throughout the sentencing, she remained impassive. Chana Van Heerden was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole, 20 years for ending a life and an additional 15 for robbery and dismemberment. As for Martins van der Merwe, unlike his partner, he defended himself in court. He claimed not to remember the events that occurred until he found himself in jail and behaved arrogantly and aggressively. The defendant admitted to studying Satanism and occultism, trying to understand life and death. He said his relationship with Chana pushed them both towards committing the crime. During the trial, he apologized to the victim's parents, although his words sounded insincere. He implied that the victim was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, although in reality, the mad couple had lured the unfortunate man into a premeditated trap. Michael's mother could not contain her distress and struck the accused during one of the sessions. Ultimately, Martins van der Merwe was also found guilty of the charges against him and sentenced to 35 years in prison, but with a chance for parole after serving half of his sentence. Life after. Until 2014, the lovers kept in touch behind bars. In his letters, Martins called Chana a dark goddess, writing, "Lady Blackmore, when you part your lips, words of a dead butterfly spell out. They fall upon my mystical heart and paint it with sweet poison, spreading beautiful darkness through my empty veins." Over time, Chana ended the relationship with her former lover, feeling that they had grown cold and distant from each other. It is known that in prison the woman behaves exemplarily, teaching her fellow inmates art and theology. Collectors fascinated by the lives of humanity's worst, maniacs, offenders, cannibals, have paid large sums for a photograph of the woman with her autograph, as well as a print of her hand. Remarkably, Martins also developed his own fan club. For a long time, police monitored his followers to prevent them from emulating his actions. The convicted man continued treatment and completed his education through correspondence courses. Thus, a good-natured young man became the victim of a terrible scheme by two mentally unstable individuals. Driven by their own desires, lacking restraining mechanisms and societal norms, the perpetrators decided they had the right to take another person's life. Yet what is also monstrous in this story is how many troubled individuals there are among us. Sometimes behind an innocent facade lies sheer hell. New acquaintances do not always positively affect our lives. Sometimes they can mark a point of no return.